Constitution was drafted, there were proposed amendments. And the disagreements came about if the amendments were needed and if they even belonged in the Constitution in the first place. How the Constitution and our covenants are interpreted also changes. Earlier, I read the 14th Amendment, which was designed to place limits on states' power as well as protect civil rights, abolishing slavery. It was hard fought and hard won with a tragic civil war. We know that the 14th Amendment didn't abolish racism. That continued with Jim Crow and now with a new Jim Crow. Racism, particularly racism against Black people, shows up in many subtle and not so subtle ways, but on paper anyway. Any citizen was and is entitled to life, liberty, property, and equal protection under the law. Some people describe ratification of the 14th Amendment as the second founding of this nation, because the nation that existed before its ratification was vastly different from the one that existed before. The nation that existed after its ratification was vastly different than the one that existed before. Blacks were given the rights of citizens, and Black people, Black men anyway, were given the right to vote. Passage of the 14th Amendment was the first time that the protections for a citizen's liberties applied to the states as well as to the federal government. In other words, states could not take away civil liberties guaranteed by the Constitution. One way to look at our history is to say that we have struggled since the second founding in 1868 and passage of the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. We have struggled, and that struggle has been to protect the rights of those who were excluded in the first founding in 1776. The work for justice to include people of any race, gender, and class. And this is a struggle that continues today. The 14th Amendment's guarantee to liberty is known as, quote, the substantive font of individual rights, end quote, rights that are not explicit in the Constitution. In other words, any citizen's right to liberty guaranteed by the 14th Amendment has been broadly and liberally interpreted as a guarantee to many rights, even those not specifically named in the Constitution. This legal reasoning was used starting in the 1920s and through 2015 to guarantee many liberties, such as a parent's right to raise their child as they see fit, the right to marry who we choose, the right to procreate, to have children or not, and the right to access contraception. The 14th Amendment was interpreted to guarantee the right to privacy in the most intimate of our decisions, privacy that could not be taken away by the states. The originalist or conservative interpretation of the 14th Amendment is that it guarantees only the rights mentioned in the Constitution, or those that were in place at the time that the amendment was passed in 1868. The Supreme Court recently dismantled the liberal interpretation of the 14th Amendment in its decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, saying that since abortion wasn't legal in 1868, it should not be legal now. The majority opinion said that the right to abortion is not protected in the Constitution, so states can ban abortion, and many were poised to do so and have done so. A conservative view says that interpretation of the Constitution should be narrow, based on tradition, and it does not change. Because this view is dominant now, many of us are concerned about other rights that may also be dismantled with this same narrow reasoning. The right to contraception, the right to marry who we wish, the right to raise our children as we see fit. This tension between liberal and conservative perspectives is portrayed in the media as a political battle, and it is. But I see it as a much bigger fundamental difference in how we experience the world and whether we expect change. Do we adapt to changing circumstances and new information, or do we demand a lens of tradition alone? How can we do so, knowing that our history tells of a vision limited by biases and the exclusion of so many? The last lesson I take from the history of our democracy is that covenants, agreements, need accountability. How will we handle times when the covenant is breached or broken? When a president refuses to participate in a peaceful transition of power after an election? When a court refuses to honor legal precedent or erodes the separation between church and state? When leaders lie, spin, mislead? And what about when civil liberties have been denied? What do we do then? These are really big questions, ones that we are wrestling with as a nation. And we're also wrestling with these kinds of questions in our Unitarian Universalist Association. You might say that the Constitutional Convention for Unitarian Universalism was in 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalists voted to merge into one denomination. Delegates to the newly formed denomination created an association of congregations called the Unitarian Universalist Association, or the UUA, and established a structure, power, and authority of the association. The covenant of the UUA is written in the bylaws, our Constitution, if you will. Article 2 of the bylaws outlines the purpose of the UUA, as well as the 7 principles and the 6 sources. It's one of our guiding documents. And you can find those at a link that we'll put in the chat for those online. We identify as a liberal faith. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal faith, which is not a political statement. It means that as a liberal tradition, we expect people to change. We expect our beliefs and values to change, and we expect our congregations and our association to change. The UUA bylaws not only expect change, they require it. The bylaws say that Article 2 is to be reviewed every 15 years. The purposes, principles, and sources created in 1961 were significantly changed in 1984, adding the 7th principle as a most notable change. And those changes were driven primarily by the voices of women, voices that had been excluded before. Those principles, purposes, and sources have served us since 1984 and are under review right now by the Article 2 Commission. We can expect a new proposed Article 2 next January. This revision will be the result of several years of listening to many voices, some that have been silenced and marginalized in our history. The Commission will craft a new aspiration for how we want to be in relationship with each other and in the world. They have leaned into our liberal tradition and embraced change, and they are considering accountability and how we can return to right relationship when our covenants are broken. Right now, there are both liberal and conservative voices in the UUA, and there is tension because of this. Conservative voices are concerned about the changes to the sacred text of our principles. Liberal voices are calling for principles that include the perspective of those who have not been heard in our past. Just like the history of our nation, the history of our faith is dominated by educated, middle-class white men. Some of us think it is time for a second founding of Unitarian Universalism, one that recognizes all of us and includes the many voices of our faith. How can we be a voice for justice in this changing, multicultural world if we don't practice justice in our own congregations and in our association? We can expect tension when there is change. I hope that we navigate this tension in covenant, knowing that we are interdependent and that we need each other, just like our nation. Many have sacrificed for our faith to exist. Unitarian Universalism has an inclusive, life-giving message to offer a world that is desperately in need of it. A message that recognizes the inherent worth of individuals and the depth of our interconnectedness, independence and interdependence both. May the power of our covenant support us as we work together to bring our powerful message to this world. Happy 4th of July. Let's sing together, Troy.
Let's sing hymn number 1017, Building a New Way. If you are online, you can find the lyrics posted in the chat. I invite you to rise in body and our spirit, and let's sing together. We are building a new way. We are building a new way.
As our time together comes to a close, remember to stay online for breakout rooms where you can meet people from other congregations and say hello to visitors. We began our time together by lighting twin flames, the first for those who seek and defend the right to free and responsible search for truth and meaning so that each person may live according to conscience in a democratically elected society. The second flame for the defenders of freedom, working against those who would impose their own religious beliefs on others through intimidation or legislation. Although we extinguish these flames today, may we tend these fires always, ever vigilant and courageous in the struggle for freedom and justice for all. May we move in peace.
Let's sing together our unison benediction. We are thank you for coming and singing. I really appreciate it. And yesterday as well. Sure, thank you for singing. Thank you. Do you guys have matchy shoes? What's the chances?
Along the